the years, the horror genre has given us quite a few memorable monsters and villains. However, as horror fans, when we get into the films within the genre, we expect villains, monsters, guts, and gore. So maybe that's why, as horror fans, we've never had a nightmare about Freddy or Jason. However, you know what we did have nightmares about? The monsters that showed up rather unexpectedly in movies they had no business being in the first place. In today's video, I'm going to be listing 18 such creatures who showed up in non-horror movies that definitely gave me nightmares after my first viewing. We're excited for this one, but before we get too deep into it, we do have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Terror Dogs, Ghostbusters. Starting off the list strong, we have Terror Dogs from Ghostbusters 1984 and Ghostbusters Afterlife. These terror dogs are actually demonic hellhounds, which would have been more than happy to use you as a chew toy. They're bulky and huge, and while they might resemble a normal dog, don't let that fool you. If you try to pet them thinking they're good boys, they will definitely chomp down on your jugular and possess you as a vessel. They have glowing red eyes and horns, which should be enough of a red flag to stay away from them. The most famous hellhounds obviously have to be Gozer's two loyal doggos, Zuul and Vince Clortho. They both manifested from the terror dog statues on top of Dana's building in the first movie. Zuul stalked Dana, appeared inside her refrigerator, and eventually possessed her. On the other hand, Vince went after Louis Tully. Vince showed up at Tully's apartment in the middle of the night and chased him down to Central Park, ultimately possessing him. After being possessed by the demon dog, Dana's personality changed quite a bit and ended up becoming hypersexualized. She seduced Peter Venkman, and when he rejected her advances, she started levitating and growled inhumanly at him. Louis, on the other hand, became much more clumsy and stumbled around Central Park. He confused a carriage horse for the gatekeeper, and when the coachman offered him a ride, he started growling at him, which led to him getting dropped off at the Ghostbusters. Eventually, the two dogs sought each other out when there was an explosion in the Ghostbusters firehouse. Vince and Zuul met inside Dana's apartment, kissed, and went up to the rooftop to complete their mating ritual. Once the ritual was completed, the two dogs were hit with lightning, which they used to open the temple door to ensure Gozer's arrival. When Gozer was finally defeated, these two dogs went back to being statues, with Dana and Louis still trapped inside them, until the Ghostbusters managed to free them. While they did all of that in the original movie, in Ghostbusters Afterlife, they were manifested at the Shandor Mining Company property in Oklahoma. However, before they could wreak havoc, Egon Spengler managed to trap Vince. When Vince was later set free by Gary Gruberson, Podcast, and Phoebe Spengler by accident, he possessed Gary and Zuul possessed Callie. They both looked for each other and eventually managed to reunite in the Shandor mine. As you can probably guess, after they were done with the ritual mating, they took their complete demonic form and released Gozer. While Phoebe and Podcast are able to turn Gozer into a disembodied form when they capture Zuul with a remote trap vehicle, Zuul is soon set free by Gozer, and she possesses Lucky Domingo next. She took on her terror dog form, and Gozer was restored to full health. Luckily, the traps that were buried around the property activate and manage to capture Gozer and his two loyal companions, as well as several ghost wisps. Eventually, the terror dog bodies become charred husks, with Gary and Lucky inside them, until Trevor Spengler managed to set them free. So yeah, these two big ugly doggos are anything but man's best friend. The Pale Man, Pan's Labyrinth. I have absolutely no shame in admitting this. The Pale Man terrified me completely when I first saw Pan's Labyrinth. The way he moves is enough to get my spine tingling, and not in a good way. If you have no idea who the Pale Man is, I am extremely jealous of you. You're lucky. For now. Guillermo del Toro has made it very clear over the years that he really likes monsters. That's probably why the Pale Man is so iconic among his films, despite not even having a proper name. Set in Spain in 1944, Pan's Labyrinth focuses on the story of a young girl named Ophelia who really wants to escape the dark life she has to live under the control of her fascist stepfather. She's given 3 tasks by a faun, on completion of which she would be able to take her place next to her true father. In her second task, she has to use a piece of chalk and enter the lair of the Pale Man. this lanky albino monster who loves snacking on children. But what makes the Pale Man so scary? Well, in one of his 2017 tweets, Del Toro said that the Pale Man actually symbolizes the institutional evil that feeds on the helpless. He mentioned that the fact that the Pale Man is pale and is a man isn't at all a coincidence. Well, the symbolic implication that the Pale Man represents both the power of the Catholic Church over people during that era as well as white men in general is horrifying. The way the Pale Man works is nightmare-inducing. When Ophelia enters this church-like setting, you see the Pale Man sitting at the far end of what seems to be a huge table full of tasty fruits. Between his two hands, there's a plate with his eyes. While the fruits and the strange Pale Man sitting at the end of the table are distracting enough, if you look closely, you can see the collections of shoes that he has on the floor very clearly from his previous victims. Ophelia manages to get the dagger that she needs, but before she can escape, the fruits on the table beckon her. She simply can't help herself but take a grape, and while she's enjoying the savory taste, with small cracks of bones, the Pale Man awakens. The room is full of his steady yet raspy breathing, and when we see him put the eyes back into the palms of his hands and use those to look at Ophelia, you can feel the terror in your heart. As the girl is enjoying the fruits, the Pale Man gets up from his seat in janky movements and makes his way towards her. By the time Ophelia notices, it's already too late. The fairies that were with her managed to distract him long enough for Ophelia to run to the door she drew with chalk, but it closed right before she could reach it. The Pale Man tore the heads of the fairies off in a gruesome manner and followed after Ophelia using the eye of his outstretched hand. Watching him chase after Ophelia is absolutely horrifying, especially as she tries to make another door to get out of the hellhole. Not to sound too cliche, but I felt like I was holding my breath while Ophelia was making this escape. Could finally breathe again once she got out and pushed the door down. Shelob, Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Well, arachnophobiacs, I got bad news for you. The Lord of the Rings has a giant spider in it, and it's definitely going to haunt you for a while. Out of all of the disturbing creatures in the Lord of the Rings films, the most memorable one might be the giant spider known as Shelob. Frodo and Samwise have to face the giant arachnid, and once you learn where she comes from, this entire scene gets even more terrifying. So, in the books, the first time we learn of Shelob is in the Two Towers. Her name literally means she-spider, and while you might think that she's just a humongous spider, actually she's a demon woman who has taken the shape of a large spider. That's why it makes sense that Shelob is far more intelligent than your average arachnid. She's actually the descendant of Ungoliant, another demon who took the form of a giant spider. Ungoliant was Melkor's ally, who drained the sap from the two trees in Aman, filling them up with her poison so that they would wither and die. The more Ungoliant drank the sap, the larger she became, and with her size, her appetite increased. She even tried to take the Silmarils from Melkor, but she was chased away by his loyal followers, the Balrogs. After being chased away, Ungoliant ventured further away and mated with a lot of giant spiders, giving birth to several offspring. Shelob is one such offspring, or possibly one of some later generation. For those who don't know, Ungoliant grew so large that her hunger was insatiable, and eventually she ate herself to get rid of the hunger. Coming back to Shelob, she was born in Ered Gorgoroth. When the War of Wrath took place, she fled from Ered Gorgoroth to the Mountains of Shadow above Minas Morgul. While it is true that this means she was very close to Sauron's territory, Sauron didn't harm her. In fact, he allowed her to remain there as his pet, acting as a guard spider against anyone who tried to infiltrate Mordor. As Shelob is a demon, you can bet your bottom dollar that she's very evil. She hated elves with a passion, as they were one of the many sources of her one true weakness, light. Galadriel in particular she noted as her enemy, as she was the keeper of light. Now, don't confuse Shelob with Mirkwood spiders from the Hobbit series. We can assume that these Mirkwood spiders are her descendants, even though Shelob was rather popular for eating her young. It's very much possible that these Mirkwood spiders were the young of the youngs who managed to escape, so we can very much conclude that most spiders in the Lord of the Rings franchise, if not all of them, are related to Shelob, and yes, that includes the spiders of Nan Dungortheb. You might ask how all of this ties in with Shelob's meeting with Frodo. Well, as it turns out, Gollum was caught by Shelob at one point, and Gollum managed to escape from her clutches by promising her an even better prey, which, as you can guess, was Frodo. And Gollum directly led Frodo to her lair. Of course, Gollum used this arrangement so that he could kill two birds with one stone. to get rid of the hobbits and to get the ring for himself. Luckily for Frodo, who ended up paralyzed due to her venom, Samwise swooped in to rescue him. While Sam did manage to injure Shelob very badly with Sting and the Vial of Light from Lothlorien, there's no guarantee that she was killed. It could very well be that she still roams the Mountains of Shadow, preying on unsuspecting creatures who fall in her path. Or it could be that, just like Ungoliant, Shelob ate herself as she was already injured and probably very hungry. Either way, there's no denying that she was a creature of darkness, and she is absolutely terrifying. Dementors, Harry Potter. Other than all the actions of Dumbledore and the Dursleys, what absolutely scared me the most in the Harry Potter universe was the Dementors. These dark creatures that glide are basically the foulest creatures present in the wizarding world. They feed on human happiness, and whenever someone's close to them, that person feels depression and despair as it sucks every last drop of joy out of them. Not only that, if you get close enough, the Dementors will suck the soul out of a person, leaving the victims in a vegetative state, an empty shell of who they used to be. At first, these Dementors were employed by the British Ministry of Magic as prison guards in Azkaban. There, these Dementors induced insanity and despair among all the prisoners. You could say the Dementors turned the prisoners demented. Between 1733 and 1747, Eldritch Diggory, the then minister, visited Azkaban and learned about the horrible conditions of the prisoners. He wanted to come up with an alternative solution, but people opposed him as they were scared the Dementors would descend upon them after their food source was taken away from them. As Diggory died of dragonpox, nothing came of his committee, and the alternative route was stopped. The Dementors remained in Azkaban and were also sent to guard other locations, escort prisoners, and hunt criminals for the Ministry. While most of the wizarding world accepted Dementors, Dumbledore felt that it was a mistake on the Ministry's part to ally themselves with these creatures. As you might know, in 1993, when Sirius Black escaped from Azkaban, several Dementors were sent by the Ministry to guard Hogwarts and Harry from him. Whenever Harry came close to the Dementor, he was forced to relive the painful memory of his parents dying at the hands of Voldemort. A year later, during the Triwizard Tournament, Harry thought he meant a Dementor, but it was actually a Boggart. Things definitely took a turn for the worse when, a year later, in 1996, Voldemort showed up and the Dementors defected and became his natural allies. But Dementors aren't inherently disloyal. All they care about is who can provide them with the most people to feed on. While they cannot be destroyed completely, their numbers can be controlled if despair and degradation are stopped from forming. The most effective way to deal with a Dementor is by using the Patronus charm.
How do you choose to die?
Smaug, the Hobbit. Despite how simple the name sounds, Smaug is actually a fire drake of the Third Age. In the Lord of the Rings universe, he's the last great dragon of Middle-earth. During King Thror's reign, Smaug was very attracted to the large amount of wealth the dwarves of the Lonely Mountain had collected, so he burnt down the nearby city of Dale, drove out all of the dwarves, and took the Lonely Mountain for himself. For the next 171 years, he hoarded all of the treasures for himself and hibernated peacefully until he was awoken by the dwarves who managed to get into the Lonely Mountain from the men in Lake Town. So Smaug went after Lake Town, almost destroying it before being killed himself. While this is who he is in the books, Smaug's appearance and behavior on screen were slightly different, but no less scary. In the movie, Smaug's design changes quite a bit. In the prologue of An Unexpected Journey, Smaug had 6 limbs, 2 forelimbs, and 4 hind limbs, but in the later movies he had just 4 limbs, with 2 hind limbs and 2 forelimbs acting as bat-like wings, with 6 digits that helped him climb. In the first film, Smaug's scales looked a little blue at the end, but it could be because of the dark lighting of the Erebor halls, or because the filmmakers hadn't finalized his design. Unlike in the books, Smaug's underbelly is heavily armored in the movies, whereas in the book, it's artificially protected with gold and gems. The patch that Bilbo notices to be naked is actually a missing scale that broke off when Smaug was attacking Dale and got hit by Girion's black arrow. While Smaug fans do like to see him breathe fire, we don't get to see him intentionally smashing mountains on his way to Lake Town or hear him monologue about his tail and fiery breath when he speaks with Bilbo. Despite these small changes, there's no denying that we all felt the terror Bilbo felt when he met Smaug and had to go up against him. Shai-Hulud, Dune 2021. That Kevin Bacon movie from the 90s where there were creatures that came out of the ground and ate everyone they came across? Yeah, so imagine those creatures, then multiply them by 1,000, make them 1,000 times more vicious, and that should give you a rough estimate of what Shai-Hulud, or the Great Sandworm of Arrakis, looks like. These sandworms are autotrophic animals that were found on the planet Arrakis. No one knows where they came from, but their appearance was noted in Arrakis before the Butlerian Jihad. These sandworms live under the desert and come to the surface when there are rhythmic vibrations on the ground. They're extremely territorial, and whenever they felt the vibration, the goal of the sandworm was to get rid of anything that caused it. These sandworms are extremely important in the creation of spice melange, but there's no denying that they're extremely scary. Barely anyone has faced a sandworm and lived to tell the tale. Other than the Fremen, of course. We don't count the Fremen, they're so badass they can actually ride these things. That said, the sandworms of Arrakis are so territorial that if they sense another of their kind slithering into their territory, they'll start roaring in challenge, filling the air with the melange-smelling exhaust. They grow up to 450 meters long, which, if you want an idea about it, is roughly 14 blue whales in length. Each blue whale is 33 meters long, and they're the largest animal on Earth, so you do the math. Some even say that 700-meter-long sandworms could be found in the southern pole regions, but this hasn't been confirmed. These thick-skinned, scaly worms are more than 1,000 years old, owing to their extreme longevity. Author Frank Herbert actually based these worms on fictitious dragons, and it shows. These sandworms would attack anyone who tried to harvest the spice, just like dragons would attack anyone who tried to get their treasure. These sandworms are vital to the people of Arrakis, but at the same time, a constant danger, and I think that's kind of poetic in a way. The Balrog, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, 2001. Valarukar, or Balrogs, or whatever you want to call them, were the Maiar that Morgoth managed to corrupt. He turned them into Umayars, who are absolutely dreadful. They used to dwell in Autumno, the great fortress of the Iron Mountains. When their master was defeated in the Battle of the Powers, these Balrogs went to Angband with the other creatures in Melkor's service and hibernated there. When Ungoliant tried to attack Morgoth, the Balrogs woke up and drove Ungoliant away. They are these huge, almost humanoid, but not quite beings. They're always surrounded by smoke and flame and are about twice the height of an elf. As these Balrogs are a mockery of the Valar, they exude power and terror instead of the majesty of the Valar. These Balrogs have hearts of fire and yellow eyes that glow like furnaces. Their hair is a streaming mane, causing a blaze behind them. They have long arms with steel claws, and their tongues are like red stabbing blades. In The Fellowship of the Ring, Tolkien said dark shadow-like wings showed up behind Durin's Bane at the bridge of Khazad-dûm. However, Durin's Bane and two Balrogs in the Fall of Gondolin did fall from high places with no aerial recovery, so we don't know for sure if they have wings or not. That said, they are extremely powerful as they managed to chase away Ungoliant, who had devoured the fruits of Telperion. They carried swords of ever-burning fire and whips that whistled with many thongs. They were always clad in armor made of iron. Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs, in the first stage had a black axe, whereas Durin's Bane had a flaming whip and molten sword. They are extremely fast and agile, and they're not an easy foe to go against. Gothmog even overcame Fëanor, the mightiest of the children of Ilúvatar, so you can understand what a threat they are. Peter Jackson and his team of animators went all out when it came to designing the Balrog for the movies, and honestly, we as fans were satisfied. The Balrogs look absolutely fear-inducing, and there's no way your heart didn't stop for a second when it showed up in the mines of Moria. And hey, even if your heart didn't stop, the same can't be said for Gandalf. Rancor, Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. These semi-sentient reptilian creatures from the planet Dathomir definitely left a mark on Star Wars fans. Yes, we're talking about the Rancor. While they are native to Dathomir, they're also found on Felucia, Kobo, and, of course, Tatooine. Standing about 5 meters tall, these lumbering monsters have long arms and immense jaws which they often use for attacking. Their hides were armored and strong enough to withstand blaster fire. There's no denying that they're extremely formidable predators. This species often had aggressive outbursts even though they're not inherently vicious to the other creatures around them. On Felucia, we get to see the subspecies known as the Jungle Rancor. Other subspecies include the Rage Rancor and Shadow Rancors. As you might guess, the Rage Rancors are much more aggressive than your average Rancor, whereas the Shadow Rancors got their name from their black skin and the tendency they have to cause destruction. While they're not the brightest animals on this list, they are absolutely ferocious with their strength. Anything they lack in brains, they certainly make up for in brawn. The Tyrannosaurus Rex, Jurassic Park. The king of the dinosaurs, better known as the Tyrannosaurus Rex, lived in North America during the late Cretaceous period. They are one of the largest theropods, almost reaching 13 feet in height and 43 feet in length. They weighed well over 11,000 kilograms, and while this was the initial estimate, recent studies have found that the Tyrannosaurus could even grow up to 50 feet long, stand at 16 feet high, and weigh in at around 15,000 kilograms. This is one of the most well-studied dinosaurs in the world since its first description in 1905. That's why it's no surprise to Dr. Alan Grant when he learned that John Hammond had created a T-Rex. With the display of the T-Rex skeleton at the visitor center, it was safe to say everyone was pretty hyped up to see a T-Rex. Sadly, they couldn't lure the T-Rex with the goat when the cars stopped in front of the Tyrannosaurus paddock. Right after, Dennis Nedry shut down the park security system and the T-Rex shows up for real. With the iconic shaking water cup scene, we're introduced to perhaps the real star of this movie, Rexy. While the fan-given name makes her sound absolutely adorable, there's nothing cute about this monster. She eats the goat and escapes from her paddock. Donald Gennaro, the lawyer, runs away, leaving the kids, who accidentally end up attracting Rexy towards them with the brightest flashlight ever. I think we all felt the same way when Alan told Ian Malcolm not to move. I know I was stiff as a board in my seat, even though Rexy couldn't get to me. And I'm sure we all felt the horror when Rexy focused on the kids, attacking them through the Jeep. Well, what Ian did was brave, we have to admit. I do find it a bit funny the way Donald and Rexy stare at each other before she munches down on him. After getting her fill, Rexy went back to the car and toppled it over, giving us another tense scene as Alan desperately tries to get out of its way with Lex. When Dr. Ellie Sattler, the paleobotanist, and Robert Muldoon, the game warden, show up to look for Lex and Tim, they find Alan with a broken leg, but right as they figured that Alan and the kids survived, Rexy shows up once again, chasing their Jeep down. After a very close chase, Rexy gave up and the search party went back to the visitor center. The next day, Tim, Lex, and Alan see Rexy chasing a herd of Gallimimus before eating one of them. Before she realized that she had unwanted visitors, Alan grabbed Tim and made a run for it. Finally, in the last act of the movie, when everyone's trying to run away from the Alpha Velociraptor and her teammate, Rexy shows up to save the day. She breaks into the visitor center and kills 2 raptors that had been troubling the humans. Finally, as she lets out her victory roar, the banner, "When Dinosaurs Ruled the Earth," falls to the ground, giving us a very iconic image for a very iconic ending. She's scary, yet she's the most memorable part of the movie. What can I say? I'm a huge fan of Rexy. The Mutant Bear, Annihilation. The movie Annihilation definitely left a mark on everyone who watched it, but the most spine-chilling scene from this terrifying film has to be the one with the mutated bear. When Lena and her team enter Fort Amaya to rest, this American black bear, mutated to be a little larger than average, stalks them. It quickly grabs Cass Shepard through a hole in the fencing perimeter that tore open and drags her away as she screams for help. Strangely though, the next day, when Lena found the remains of Cass, it seemed like the bear didn't eat her completely, leaving her remains as a warning. Later, when Anya was interrogating her teammates, we hear the soft croak of Cass's voice begging for help. It became very clear that it was actually the bear who was mimicking Cass's voice just to get a reaction from the trio. The bear alternates between its bellows and Cass's cries for help. At one point, it even stared Ventress down right before it bit down on her shoulder. Anya fired at the bear, but it ripped her jaw apart in quick slashes. Before it could do the same to everyone, Josie managed to gun it down, ripping its skull completely. The most striking thing about this mutated bear is the way it looks. Imagine the body of a bear, but then on top, it's a bony skull. It looks both dead and alive at the same time and is absolutely chilling. Chernabog, Fantasia, 1940. Based on the god of night in Slavic mythology, Chernabog is a demon we see in the Night on Bald Mountain / Ave Maria segment of Fantasia. Chernabog is the most evil character that's ever been represented on Disney screens simply because he's very raw. Whatever he does so because he wants to be tyrannical, and that's that. He's evil because he can be, not because he has some reason. He's so big that at one point, one of his wings is mistaken as one of the peaks of the Bald Mountains. He stretched out his arms and cast a dark shadow over the underlying village simply to call upon the ghosts and spirits of hanged soldiers, souls who weren't buried in sacred ground, and fallen warriors, simply because he could. All of these ghosts come together as a single mass and swirl around Chernabog, who breathes fire and calls upon demons. He throws some of them into the flames simply because he can. He uses the flames to create images, and as his demons dance, he catches harpies that fly above them and throws them into the inferno. You can see just how malicious he is as he keeps on torturing his minions just for entertainment. Eventually, his reign ends when the church bells ring and the dawn breaks. Chernabog covers himself with his wings and becomes the peak once more to protect himself. Oogie Boogie, The Nightmare Before Christmas, 1993. The infamous boogeyman, depicted as a burlap sack filled to the brim with bugs, is Oogie Boogie, the main antagonist of The Nightmare Before Christmas. He really likes gambling for some reason and lives on the outskirts of Halloween Town. He has a cannibalistic appetite, and his ghastly nature makes him quite feared and detested even inside Halloween Town. In the movie, Jack asks Lock, Shock, and Barrel to kidnap Santa Claus so that he can give gifts to the kids. He told them not to include Oogie Boogie in his schemes, but they actually end up taking Santa to Oogie's funhouse instead. There, Oogie tortures poor Santa Claus sadistically before devouring him. Luckily, Sally managed to realize what had happened and seduced Oogie with her detached leg, giving Santa a chance to escape. Sadly, Oogie soon realized what they were up to and sentenced both of them to painful deaths. The mayor of Halloween Town announced the tragedy of Jack being shot down by the human military after getting the terrible news. While the whole town mourned the loss of their king, Oogie continued with his scheme, confident no one would be there to stop him. Luckily, Jack actually survived the attack and came to Oogie's funhouse right on time to save his friends from falling into a magma pit. Oogie Boogie and Jack fight, and eventually Jack manages to win by unfurling Oogie's sack with a loose thread, causing most of the bugs to fall into the magma pit. The one bug that acted as his brain was stomped on by Jack, bringing an end to the villainous boogeyman. Rasputin, Anastasia. Although originally Rasputin was a family advisor to the royal Russian family, he wanted to take over Russia for himself, leading to Nicholas II banishing him. Obviously not happy about that, Rasputin sold his soul to the forces of darkness and became an undead creature in the process in exchange for the power to kill Nicholas II and his family. He returned back to the Russian palace and cursed them with the Romanov curse. This curse affected the soldiers who went ahead and started executing Nicholas and his family. Everyone except Nicholas's mother Marie and his daughter Anastasia were killed. Rasputin tried to kill Anastasia after chasing her across a frozen river. While jumping down to tackle the girl into the ice, he lost his amulet in the process. He swore that she would never escape his grasp, but the ice beneath him broke and he drowned, getting him stuck in limbo. Anastasia lost her memories and was separated from Marie. 10 years passed and Rasputin was still stuck in limbo. That's when Bartok tells him that Anastasia is still alive, going by the name Anya. This enraged him enough that Rasputin swore to finish what he started years ago. He sent green demons after Anya and her friends Vladimir and Dmitri. These demons sabotaged the train by separating the coaches, but Anya, Vladimir, and Dmitri managed to survive that attack. Rasputin, in his rage, even invaded Anya's sleep, hoping she would sleepwalk right off the edge of the ship she was on, but that plan too was foiled. Eventually, Rasputin tried to recreate that tragic night by bringing Anastasia to the frozen Seine River and the Alexander Bridge. Dmitri tries to help Anastasia, but he's knocked unconscious by a statue that Rasputin brought back to life. He attacked Anastasia viciously, and at first it looked like he would win, but Anastasia eventually triumphed and managed to get the upper hand. She got hold of the reliquary that held the demons inside and also acted as Rasputin's source of magic and stomped on it until it broke into pieces. The demons inside the reliquary grabbed onto Rasputin, collecting his soul as punishment as he could not kill Anastasia. His skin melts completely away and he crumples to the floor. His skeleton twitches before crumpling into a pile of dust and being blown away by the wind. You guys can vote if you think his death was more horrifying than his actual character. My vote's always gonna go to that death scene. That shit scarred me for life.
Come here.
The Wheelers return to Oz, 1985. The humans with wheels for hands and feet were the scariest creatures to ever appear in a Disney film. These humans were known as the Wheelers, and they served Princess Mombi until she died. When Dorothy first came to the Emerald City and found it conquered, she heard the wheels squeaking. Soon enough, she was chased by the Wheelers until she reached the secret room where Tick-Tock was. The head Wheeler peeked through the keyhole and threatened Dorothy, telling her that they would tear her to pieces because she stole a lunch pail and had chicken with her. They actually chase her around for quite a bit until the head Wheeler is told to escort Dorothy and the good guys to Princess Mombi. Although initially reluctant, he eventually complies, although begrudgingly. As we soon find out, Princess Mombi is the bad guy, and when the Wheelers are unable to stop Dorothy and her friends from reaching the Gnome King's mountain, she gets super upset. She even sent them after Dorothy, knowing they'd have to cross the deadly desert where they would turn into sand the moment they fell into it. She even hitched the Wheelers to a chariot and asked them to take her to the Gnome King's mountain. When she's locked in a cage for letting Dorothy escape, the Wheelers finally have a change of heart and leave Mombi behind despite her calls for help. After the Emerald City is freed, Dorothy bids goodbye to all her friends, including the Wheelers. I don't know if I'd agree to be as open to them if I were in Dorothy's place, if I'm being perfectly honest. Skeksis, Dark Crystal, 1982. Would you have guessed the Lord of the Crystal to be something that looked like a vulture? I sure didn't, but that is what the Skeksis look like. They are the rulers of an empire that dominated Thra during the Age of Divisions. Just like Uru, these Skeksis were a part of the Ur-Skeks. They were knowledgeable and passionate, but cruel and aggressive at the same time. While they have been separated, each Uru shares a spiritual link with their Skeksis counterpart, constantly reminding them that they were once together. If one of them is hurt, the other would also feel their pain. Now, I know I called them vultures, but that's not really entirely accurate. They're actually reptiles, sorta. The Skeksis posed as the caretakers of the crystal, but they were really using its powers to extend their lives and spread the darkening. They ruled for thousands of years, and to ensure that they couldn't be moved easily, the Skeksis formed an alliance with the Gelflings. To make sure that the Gelflings never had the courage to rise up against them, the Skeksis divided them. Other species that didn't like the Skeksis or were opposed to their rule were promptly moved or killed. After a millennium of abuse, when the crystal lost its power, the Skeksis started kidnapping Gelflings to drain their essence and be rejuvenated. Eventually, the Garthim War broke out, and even though Skek-Ung rose to the throne as the new emperor, there were a lot of fights among the Skeksis, and their rule eventually came to an end. The Skeksis are the true epitome of selfishness and cruelty that knows no bounds. The Kraken, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest, 2006. Anyone who's seen this movie remembers the scene of Jack Sparrow gearing up with his sword drawn out as the Kraken arises from the depths of the sea. This Kraken is a legendary sea monster who acted as Davy Jones's pet. Whenever Davy Jones wanted an unwary ship gone, he'd send out the Kraken. The Kraken looks like a huge squid, almost the length of 10 ships. Over the years, this creature would be the subject of much lore and legend. Given how vicious it is, very few people manage to live to tell the tale after seeing it. In mythology, the Kraken is a creature with many arms or tentacles long enough to topple any vessel without any effort. The suckers on its tentacles were strong enough to pull the flesh clean away from a sailor's body. Thanks to the Kraken, Davy Jones persuaded many souls to join his crew. I mean, would you rather die at the hands of that beast or be a part of this funny fishman's crew? Now, Jack Sparrow was marked by Davy Jones with a black spot. This black spot meant the Kraken would come after him, so Jack decided to figure out where Davy Jones's heart was laid to rest. He planned on using the heart of Davy Jones to call off the Kraken. However, as we all know, Jack did not, in fact, have the heart in his beloved jar of dirt. Elizabeth shackled Jack to the Black Pearl, and the Kraken took both Jack and his beloved Black Pearl to the depths of the ocean floor. Sadly, as we soon learn, the Kraken was killed by Lord Cutler Beckett's forces. That's kind of hard to believe, especially with how terrified I was of the Kraken on my first viewing of this movie. Cyborg Vera, Superman 3. I think one of the most horrifying scenes in a superhero movie has to be when Vera Webster got sucked into the computer in Superman 3. So, in this movie, Ross Webster, Vera's brother, gets in touch with a guy named Gus Gorman who was embezzling money. He hired Gus to use his computer hacking skills for his gains. Webster asked Gorman to change the Vulcan weather satellite to create a tornado, all in the hopes of cornering the market. Well, yes, Gorman managed to create the tornado. Superman neutralized it, which led to Webster asking Gorman to create kryptonite, the synthetic version. Gorman creates kryptonite, substituting the unknown substance with tar. This synthetic kryptonite turns Superman selfish and petty, and he goes around fixing the Leaning Tower of Pisa, blowing out the Olympic flame, and even drinking in a bar. Eventually, the good and bad Superman duke it out, and the good Superman wins, giving us our legendary hero back. So off the good old Superman goes to confront Webster. The supercomputer created by Gus that created the oil spill was smart enough to figure out Superman's weakness, and it attacked our hero with a beam of pure kryptonite. Gus destroyed the kryptonite ray with an axe, giving Superman an escape, but now the computer had become self-aware. It starts pulling Webster, Gorman, Vera, and Webster's girlfriend, Lorelei, into it. Well, at the same time, everyone else was lucky enough to step away from it. Vera wasn't. Vera became one with the machine and turned into a cyborg. The extreme close-up of her metallic eyes is extremely creepy. She then shoots at her brother and his girlfriend with beams that immobilize them. Superman returns with Beltric acid, and the heat from the computer turned the acid volatile, destroying the computer and Vera for good. Annie Ross gave us a memorable performance as Vera Webster as she struggled and fought for her life as the computer started to take over her body. Hey. Judge Doom. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? 1988. Don't worry, everybody, we saved the most traumatic entry for last. On the surface, Judge Doom might not seem that scary, but he's absolutely horrifying. He's the most feared judge of Toontown, and whenever he sees any Toons breaking a law, without a care in the world, he gives them capital punishment. He places the Toons in a vat of chemicals with old paint thinner and film dissolvers known as dip. Toons, who are usually immortal, die permanently when they touch the dip. At first, we assume that Judge Doom wears gloves because he wants to avoid the mess, which is definitely creepy, but later, we learn he's actually wearing gloves to prevent himself from melting, as he's a Toon himself. Not only is he a cruel man who kills Toons left and right, but he is also a violent criminal. Doom was the one who robbed the First National Bank of Toontown, and then to hide his tracks, he killed Teddy Valiant, one of the detectives on this case. Then, he also used the case to win the election. In the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Doom is actually the one who killed Marvin Acme, but he goes after Roger Rabbit to frame him for the murder. He's a lot of things, including absolutely incorrigible. Marvelous verdict! So there we have it, guys. Personally, I found the Pale Man and the Kraken to be the scariest, with Rexy coming in for a close second. But that said, Judge Doom really messed me up as a kid. Let us know in the comments which creature you thought was the scariest, and I'll see you down there. Until next time, if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.